1976, a Formula One season that would go down in history. Two rivals, two worlds, the disciplined and calculated Niki Lauda versus the fearless and charismatic James Hunt. But everything changed on that fateful day at the Nürburgring. Niki Lauda dominated the first half of the season. 5 wins in 9 races. He had almost twice as many points as his closest rival. But while the rest of the drivers were focused on the championship, Lauda was thinking about something else. Safety.
It was Niki Lauda, the reigning world champion, and Ferrari that most expected.
The Nürburgring, also known as the Green Hell, a circuit over 22 kilometers long with 160 corners surrounded by trees and deep ravines. Lauda was deeply concerned about the safety of racing through the Eifel Mountains. He tried to convince the other drivers to boycott the race, but he was outvoted. August 1st, 1976, the race begins in treacherous conditions. Rain had soaked the track and the risk was higher than ever. After the first lap, the entire field switched to slick tires as the track began to dry. Lauda rejoined the race but found himself stuck behind a group of slower cars, forcing him to push harder to regain lost time. Then disaster struck. On the second lap, at nearly 220 kilometers per hour, he suddenly lost control. His Ferrari slammed into an embankment, bounced back onto the track and punctured its fuel tank. Within seconds, the car burst into flames. Brett Lunger, unable to avoid the burning wreck, crashed into it, but he was unhurt. But for Lauda, the nightmare was only beginning. The cockpit turns into an inferno. Lauda is trapped. Smoke fills his lungs. Drivers Arturo Merzario, Guy Edwards, Brett Lunger and Harold Ertl stop their own races, risking their lives to save him.
It is very simple. It was explained by the doctors because I hit so hard, the helmet fell off, therefore I have all these burns.
Yeah.
And when you hit so hard, it just closes up your brain and you have no idea what happened. So I remember going out of the pits after a tire change in that race.
Yeah.
And then everything stops. Then I drove another 10 kilometers. Then I had my accident. I've seen it like you did in television, because the little boy was standing there in the woods filming it. Otherwise, I would have had no idea. The pain, honestly, I cannot tell you, because the pain, because of all this threat I had to die, I don't really remember.
Lauda is rushed to the hospital with severe burns, broken bones, and badly damaged lungs. His injuries are so extreme that a priest administers last rites.
The bad memory was that, for example, they talked to me, the doctors, I could listen to them, because they didn't know that I was listening, and they said, if you give him oxygen, he's going to be dead. And one alarming thing for me was that the nurse asked me, do you want a priest?
The world prepares to say goodbye to a champion. But Lauda, he had other plans.
And then I said to myself, no, I'm not going to die. I'm going to fight and stay alive.
Lauda suffered severe burns and lung damage from inhaling toxic fumes. His injuries forced him to miss the next 2 races in the Netherlands and Austria. In his absence, James Hunt capitalized, scoring crucial points and closing the gap, bringing his total to 47, putting him back in the title fight. Ferrari had no choice but to move forward. Daniele Audetto was instructed to find a replacement, and Carlos Reutemann was brought in to partner Clay Regazzoni. For Ferrari, the season had to continue. For Lauda, however, the fight was far from over. By early September, just weeks after leaving the hospital, Lauda made his intentions clear. He was coming back. Against all expectations, against medical advice, and against the doubts of even his own team, he demanded a test at Ferrari's Fiorano circuit. Even Enzo Ferrari himself was skeptical. When Lauda arrived, it was a sight no one would ever forget. When he arrived, that is a vision that I can never forget in my life, recalls Audetto. Niki arrived in Fiorano with his plane that he apparently flew himself to come to Bologna. He was so pale, plenty of scars, he lost hair. He could not close his eyes, he was like a ghost. Without hesitation, Lauda walked into the team office, grabbed a pair of oversized racing overalls, and stepped into his Ferrari. His first few laps were cautious. The pain, the weight loss, and the trauma were undeniable. but lap after lap, he adjusted. When he stopped, he asked for tighter seatbelts. His body was smaller now, but his will was just as strong. Then came the real shock. He wasn't just driving, he was pushing. By the time he completed 60 laps, he had nearly broken the Fiorano lap record. Enzo Ferrari looked at the lap times and made his decision. Lauda was ready. Ferrari would enter 3 cars at Monza: Reutemann, Regazzoni and Lauda. Just 42 days later, against all odds, Lauda returns to his Ferrari, his face still scarred, but his will unbreakable. He puts everything on the line to race again, and to continue his title fight with Hunt. The world could hardly believe it. Just 42 days after being pulled from a burning wreck, Niki Lauda was back on the Formula One grid. The Italian crowd at Monza erupted in applause. He not only got back behind the wheel, but also outqualified his teammate, securing a strong grid position while his fellow Ferrari driver started 9th. Meanwhile, James Hunt faced a new challenge. After being penalized for using illegal fuel in qualifying, he was forced to start from the back of the grid. But as the race began, the doubts returned. Was this really possible? The opening laps were tough. Lauda struggled to keep pace, and many questioned whether he had come back too soon. But as the race unfolded, he proved them wrong. Lap after lap, he found his rhythm, overtaking cars and climbing up the order. When he passed Carlos Reutemann, his own replacement, it sent a clear message: Niki Lauda was not finished. By the time the checkered flag waved, Lauda had finished in 4th place. For many, it was the most incredible drive they had ever witnessed. It wasn't a victory in the record books, but for Lauda, for Ferrari, and for Formula One, it was a moment that would never be forgotten. The championship battle comes down to one final race, the Japanese Grand Prix. A storm rages over Fuji Speedway. Visibility is near zero. Lauda, knowing the risk, makes a decision that shocks the world. He pulls into the pits and retires. James Hunt finishes 3rd, securing the championship by just 1 point. But Lauda had won something greater: his life. Lauda wasn't done. In 1977, he won his 2nd championship. After a brief retirement, he returned in 1982 with McLaren. And in 1984, he claimed his 3rd and final title, beating his teammate Alain Prost by just half a point.
He was the toughest guy to beat, as far as I know. The toughest guy, so therefore this championship is the most important one for me.
In 1985, Lauda retired from racing for good, but he remained a giant in the sport, mentoring drivers, leading teams, and even running his own airline. But even legends aren't invincible. Decades after his crash, Lauda's body still carried the scars. In 2018, he underwent a lung transplant. On May 20, 2019, Niki Lauda passed away peacefully at the age of 70.